A couple of weeks ago, I alluded to some of my adventures when I was a church intern before I started seminary. And one of these adventures, one of these the projects I took on while I was there, was starting a 20s and 30s group. Now, this isn't a plea to start one here. It just so happened that the circumstances opened up to the point that I saw an opening that this program could fill. And an opening there was. Before I knew it, people were volunteering to host us for dinners, and we had a core group of membership that was part of the group. And I also found that the time was growing shorter and shorter before I left to start seminary. And I started to worry. What was going to happen to the program once I left? Was there even going to be a program when I left? And most importantly of all, would there be someone to take over the program from me? And as I started getting more and more anxious, my boss and mentor gave me some great advice. Pray. Pray about the program. And not just that it would continue, but that God would use it for His purposes. That God would use it as He saw fit. And she told me to pray that no matter what happened to this program, that God's will would be done. And so I prayed. And I prayed. And I stopped worrying about it quite as much. And then one day, a young woman in our group came up to me and said that she would be willing to take over the group, that she would be willing to make sure that it continued on. At the end of the day, this program wasn't going to succeed because of anything that I did, or even because I started it. Because it was never truly mine. It was God's to do His work with. And so only He could do anything about it. And so I had to trust in Him and Him alone, and no one else, including myself. This message that I learned from my own experience is present in all of our readings today. And this is the message that we hear. To trust in God, because He is the only one we can turn to for help. And we see that very clearly in our lessons from 1 Kings and the Gospel. Because in both readings, we have a young boy, or man, the son of a widow, who has died. The fact that it is a widow in both stories is very important too. Because it would have meant not just the death of one person in both these cases, but the death of two. In ancient Israel, a widow relied on her sons to take care of her in her old age. And so the death of a widow's son meant the end of her livelihood. In both cases, there is no one left to rely on, except God. With Elijah, that is exactly what we see. We see that God is the only one to turn to. Elijah prays over this boy and even stretches himself over him. But for all that he does, for all these signs that he performs, it takes Elijah asking the Lord to let this child's life come into him again before this boy is saved. In the end, Elijah doesn't do anything. He has to ask God to let His will be done. For Jesus, it is a little bit different. He doesn't have to ask for help. He does it all on His own. All He has to do is command the boy to rise. And that is why the people are seized with fear at what has happened. This is something that has never been done by a human before. Because it can't be done. It requires one greater than any of us, greater than all of us combined. It requires the work of God, which is exactly who Jesus is. God as man. And the psalm also tells us more about this sense of relying on God. We see again this raising of us, this rising from death to life. But we also hear through that a call, a cry to God to always be our helper, to always be there with us in everything that we do. And that is why it is so important as we turn to God for these impossible tasks, these tasks like raising the dead to new life, these things that we can only rely on God for. That is why in all of these things, it is important for us as the church to make sure that God is at our center, to make sure our gospel is not of human origin, as Galatians puts it today, but one received through the revelation of Jesus Christ himself. We need to have Jesus as our center. Otherwise, our task will fail. But with him, it will flourish. God can work wonders in this world. He can bring us the people we need to help keep our programs going. He can raise the dead to new life in him, as we see in the readings today, and as we will profess in our hope in the resurrection with the creed later. God can succeed where we fail. He can be that helper that we always need. And he can even transform the heart of a hater, like Paul, into a believer, as we also hear in Galatians today. So as we go out this week to do the work God has given us to do, we can take comfort in the knowledge that he is there with us to be our constant helper. We can have comfort that we can trust in him, and that where we falter, he will lift us up. All we have to do is keep him as our center, as our foundation.